Yep. Give me a nod when you're ready.
Like
Shooter's ready. Stand by.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Bullets and Bourbon. I'm joined by my co-host Frank Gao, and today we are interviewing one of my mentors, a man who has been an advisor, innovator for change, and most importantly, a friend. Colonel Hall and I first met in Bahrain at Task Force 515, where he was the director of operations, and then when I left, we rejoined again at Weapons Training Battalion, where he served as the commanding officer. Col Howard Hall recently retired after 30 years of service. And if you listen to last week's episode with Colonel Jones and listen to the changes that have been occurring, those changes would not have been possible without the direction and guidance of Colonel Hall. Everywhere he goes, he blazes a path for mission accomplishment by giving the Marines he leads the flexibility they need to accomplish that mission. Before we get started, Colonel Hall, this is your first time, so I want to open it up to you to kind of give yourself an introduction and tell the listeners about yourself.
Well, I mean, you covered a lot of the good stuff right there, and we're just really a reflection of the Marines that we get to work with. I mean, I've had the absolute privilege of being surrounded by some true professionals, mentors, when I say mentor, it's not always the image you get of a wizened senior Marine officer or general or something like that. I've honestly learned more from my staff NCOs throughout my 30 years, I've just over time been blessed to have the opportunity to take those things I've learned, turn them around, build it into a leadership style that was by all accounts effective, and try and make a difference during my time in uniform. And Matt and I were talking just before the recording that it's going from 100 miles an hour for 30 years to a dead stop is quite an adjustment, but it's given me a time to reflect. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share a couple of these observations and a couple stories and anecdotes during the podcast. So Matt, I appreciate you inviting me, Frank. It's good to meet you, and I look forward to addressing the rest through the questions and answers.
No, absolutely. And this is something you and I have talked about since pretty much I started the podcast. Like, I wanted to get you on, but after you left Weapons Training Battalion, you took over as the G3, the director of operations at Training and Education Command. I mean, we barely talked when you were there. Like, I would come over and visit and every now and again, and you were busy. Like, you were holding down the fort for all of Training and Education Command in terms of operations. And then immediately you go take over as a chief of staff, but then General IAMS is like, hey, I need you to go do this ACV transition program, the training pipeline, and build a training program so the Marine Corps could be successful with the transition from the old AAVs and then transitioning over to the new ACVs. So the past year, 2-3 years, you've had no life and you've been subjected to just working long hours, and it just hasn't occurred. And now we finally get to sit down and conduct this interview, which I'm super excited about, because like we talked about with Colonel Hall or Colonel Jones.
Yeah.
There's not many times you often get to hear the perspective of a colonel who's had up to 30 years of service. And I think that's I don't want to call it a failure of the institution that information doesn't get out there, but that's where, like, I want to try and help pave a path to get a story out, get this information out, because it could impact a life of a junior Marine, a senior Marine, an officer, an enlisted guy, and help them find direction and what their passion and what their direction and the accomplishments that they want to leave in the Marine Corps. So I think that is important. But that kind of segues into our first question. Could you give some advice to individuals at these particular points in their Marine Corps career? So we have a newly promoted NCO, a newly promoted staff NCO, and a fresh lieutenant to the fleet.
Well, and those are certainly inflection points. They're not, what I'd call just your standard or run-of-the-mill promotion. Again, these are definitely inflection points, going from non-NCO to NCO, being a brand new officer in the fleet, or going from the NCO ranks to the staff NCO ranks. And there's something that's absolutely consistent among that, and that, again, master your billet description. Some people try too hard to be too many things at once. Every new billet has a billet description. Every new rank has some expectations identified with that. First, master the billet description, and then identify the gaps and seams and proactively fill them, because we've got to be value added to the unit. So a key part of that is growing into the new rank immediately, especially going from non-NCO to NCO. Don't simply just be a super version of your former self. There's a greater degree of expectations for NCOs. And then again, going from the NCO to the staff NCO rank, don't just be a super version of your previous self. We do this by finding a mentor, finding somebody either in the chain of command or elsewhere in the unit that we can rely on to ask those honest questions. I mean, the thing is, it's the promotion happens. They read the certificate, you get the rank on the collar, and then all of a sudden the expectations begin that moment. So I mean, we all need somebody who can help us navigate these uncertainties. The uncertainties exist, but again, our alpha type personalities teach us, no, we have the answers on day one. Very few of us have the answers on day one. So we've got to rely on those people who can guide us, who we can emulate. I told the story at my retirement, as a brand new lieutenant, Gunnery Sergeant Phil Coble, toughest son of a bitch I ever met in my life, platoon sergeant in my first platoon. He said, "Hey, listen, Lieutenant, you've got two ears and one mouth. You better listen twice as much as you talk. You may be in command, but I run this platoon. I'll let you know when you're in charge." And I was like, holy shit, there's no module on this at TBS. But I had the, enough of a wherewithal to listen to the guy. Again, I had a lot to learn from, my gunnery sergeant at the time, and he served as wise counsel. So again, for these pivotal moments, non-NCO to NCO, NCO to staff NCO, brand new officer in there, find a mentor. It may or may not be the next higher up in your chain of command. It might be that gunnery sergeant, one of those staff NCOs, or a peer who may be in the fleet just a little bit above you. On top of that, again, never stop learning. Okay, none of us have ever mastered our billet. We've always got something to learn. We've got to be hungry, whether it's inside the MOS, how the unit works, how this unit supports that unit, or bigger MAGTF issues. Again, we've got to be hungry and keep learning. And above all else, especially for these pivotal points, we've got to be genuine. The thing is, a lot of times, for a non-NCO may have that staff NCO to emulate. Oh, he's a former DI. He's a tough son of a bitch. He talks this way. He uses this. If we act like somebody else too much and bury our true selves and adopt a different persona, we're not being genuine. And the thing is, as I've seen in OIF and during numerous deployments, those who are adopting a persona and not being their true selves, they become their true self pretty fast under duress. And that just tears the unit's confidence apart when they see their leader, was acting a certain way until things got really difficult. And then that just tears apart the integrity. It tears apart the cohesion of the unit if they find out their leader was really just playing a role and acting instead of being genuine. And Matt, you and I, we've talked about, the leaders that both of us have really trusted and really appreciated. And those were the ones who were the most genuine, who you knew where they were coming from. You knew that their motivation was real. You knew their motivation was something beyond themselves and their next promotion. And we trusted them. And again, for those pivotal again, those very pivotal promotions, you've got to, be your true self and be genuine, but that requires you to know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That requires you to know yourself and to know your Marines. And again, this is all kind of cyclic. The best way to get to know yourself is to hear it through somebody else's eyes. Again, that mentor that can tell you the good, not just pump you up, but that mentor that can say, hey, listen, you're pretty good in these areas, but I think you're falling short here. We in the Marine Corps, and I can say this, still on active duty, so to speak, we're not good enough mentors. We say it. We say we're the Lejunian teacher, scholar, mentor model. But I've been counseled 3 times in 30 years. All right. I think you and I have had some counselings, but very rarely do we have that good kneecap to kneecap from a trusted mentor that says, hey, listen, you're good in these areas. You need to improve in these areas. How does the counseling normally go? Well, your PFT and CFT is good. You're a gray belt in McMap, and you need to do some more Marine Net courses. Move on, and that's it. I mean, you got to know your Marines in order to lead them effectively. That was a long answer to a simple question, but again, for those newly promoted NCOs, newly promoted staff NCOs, and brand new lieutenants, I think those are the things that I learned the hard way. And if I could, hand that to somebody getting those promotions, that's what I'd say.
Well, I mean, that kind of reminded me of a story that we kind of briefly talked about, not at length before we started this, but whenever I was a newly promoted gunny, in September, October of 2017, and immediately, like, I just came back from one mission. I get sent over to Djibouti, and Master Guns Davis is like, "Hey, I need you to go over to Djibouti, and you're going to be over there for 4 months." And I was like, "Well, I'm supposed to rotate out in January." He's like, I'm extending you for an additional 2 months, pretty much." He's like, "Are you okay with that?" I'm thinking, like, realistically, I'm like, no, I would have been gone for over a year and hadn't seen family. But I was like, you know what? Like, this is important to you. This is important to you, Colonel Hall. This is important to the general. This is the general's baby to have a liaison officer over in Djibouti. I was like, I trust them. They're not going to lead me astray, and I will go over there. Well, you know, on the other side of the house, they sent somebody else over there that he wasn't a bad guy. He was a very intelligent person, absolutely was, but he was not good with people, and he didn't truly understand, what the mission entailed. As a liaison officer, you're not in control of anything, and you are begging, borrowing, and stealing whatever you can to carry forward the mission for your commanding general without owning a thing and without being able to give anything back in return. And so I remember, like, I was able to go home on leave for a couple weeks while over there on that mission. And I came back to Bahrain to take care of some stuff because, well, we won't go into any of that, but I came back to Bahrain. And I went into your office and I sat down with you, and like, you and I had a very, like, you allowed me to have an open door policy.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that because I could just go sit in your office. I trusted you, and I could just talk to you as a person. Like, it is that professional friendship, that professional relationship that we had, that if I had something that was going on, you would listen and you would help me, you know, you would guide me to a solution. Well, in this particular instance, it had to do with this other person I was dealing with over in Djibouti, and they were not doing a good job. And I was breaking everything down to you. I was like, "Sir, my recommendation right now is that you pull this person in." And I hated to say that, just because the career implications that could have on that Marine's career. But at the same time, if they're not accomplishing the mission and they're not listening to the guidance that you are giving them to them as a staff NCO and trying to lead them down the right path, there's no place for them. We're a results oriented and a
Yeah.
people oriented organization. And if you can't commit to that, I'm sorry, but you need to go. And you 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 told me, "Hey, give it a couple weeks, see if he's improved, continue providing that mentorship." He's like, I trust you and your abilities." And you gave me that confidence, you gave me that flexibility to make a decision to come back to you and give you my answer. And I came back and I was just like, "Hey, things are in a good spot. I think we're on a better path. Keep him over there. And then coincidentally, he broke his ankle and got medevaced out of there. So, all that was in vain, but it gave me this leadership challenge that I had to figure out on my own. And without guys like you who don't give who do give people that flexibility, instances like that will not occur, which then people don't grow.
Yeah, well, and this gets to something important. Like I said, know your Marines. So again, it's not one size fits all. So there's some peers and subordinates where you just have to give them the answer. You just have to say, you will do exactly A, B, and C, and this is it. But again, knowing you and knowing your capabilities, and the other Marines who are like you, it meant more to help you develop the answer on your own. Meaning, I knew I could. I never played you, but I'll say the words. I played you differently. Instead of saying, "Here's the direction, you will do exactly this. These are my orders. Carry them out." It meant more to develop that answer together, and then you were in a more effective spot to execute that plan that we had come up with together. Because again, that trust and confidence and that professional rapport that we had built, you and I had a different relationship than I had with some of the other gunnery sergeants on the staff. And again, the trust that if we work this out together, we kind of walked toward the answer ourselves. That meant more. That was a stronger impact on you, and I had more confidence that you would execute exactly that than if I just said, here's a sheet of paper. I want you to do this. Execute.
Mm-hmm.
But without that trust and confidence, that's how it would have had to have been. But again, those are things that my mentors taught me earlier on in the career. And again, this is why you just developed this professional repertoire across however many years you're in.
Yeah.
So
And
I appreciated that.
No, and I appreciated it because it allowed me to develop as a gunnery sergeant, and it showed me what true trust and confidence really meant. And that same relationship carried over whenever we were on the shooting team, because I was like, "Hey, sir, this is the direction I want to take it," and you were just like, "Go for it, do it,
What's the
like
answer?
execute, like if it fits in the budget, do it."
Yeah.
Frank, I think you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, something you said really resonated with me, and it was about being genuine and being who you really are. But I think there's often a bit of a tension when someone is stepping into a leadership role. We pick these ranks for certain reasons because, like you said, all of a sudden there's this increased expectation, and I think there's a pressure to act a certain way, and I think what that can produce sometimes is leaders that kind of act like action figures, right? Like parrot certain phrases and are very stiff and uncomfortable. So I guess if you were to see that, like, how would you mentor that Marine in a way that allowed them to basically act more organically? Because I think that's one of the more difficult things to do, right? It's very easy for a new NCO to act like a drill instructor. We've seen that many times, but yeah, just curious to hear your thoughts there.
Right. Well, and that's the key. I mean, this goes back to knowing your Marine. So if we're in any kind of hierarchy where a subordinate is adopting that persona, you've got to be able to communicate to them in their own language, and the key to that is knowing them and giving constructive feedback. Going, hey, you're not a DI, you're not a hat, or if they were in the past, you're in a different role now. And giving that constructive, direct feedback that says, hey, have you considered this instead? Or, hey, I really don't think that's, you can't sustain this level of intensity because it doesn't fit in this environment. That's great out on the drill field, or that's not exactly what we need right here. And then, kind of guide them and give examples. But again, you have to know them first. Otherwise, it's just more, word salad going, here, be different, be better, do this. Too, like, hey, you may want to mold a little bit this way, and it's just part of professional development. But you do have to speak to them in their own language. Otherwise, it just becomes one size fits all blather. I mean, it may not have hit the nail on the head, but again, every case is a little bit different, and you got to know the capabilities and limitations of the Marines that you're working with. Who can be pushed? Who can be pulled? How far they can be pushed or pulled? Who needs a pat on the back? Who needs a kick in the ass? Again, it can't be one size fits all, but I've had many of those, those situations that you talked about. And again, so there's growing pains too. I mean, I'd rather see aggressive mistakes like you had just mentioned, but is that person refining it over time? Over time, are they adding to their skill set? Or, if all you have is a hammer, the entire world becomes a nail. And that's an effective counseling tool. Sitting down and going, listen, you got this aspect of your leadership tight, but how are you how are you counseling your Marines? How well do you know your Marines? How well are you giving guidance to your Marines, or are you just playing this action figure persona? And one of the things I like about outcomes-based training and education, and the way we've shifted in the Marine Corps, at least at SOI, going from the basic infantry Marine course to the infantry Marine course, which is focused on behaviors and skill acquisition levels and measured outcome performance, is that it's giving that opportunity and inducing failure as a tool for learning. So in a controlled environment, failure is a very effective tool. So in the past, inputs-based training and education, I'm going off on a tangent, stop me if you need me to, but I think this is key to what we're talking about. Inputs-based training and education is, here are your ELOs and your TLOs. If you repeat the answer back to me just the way I said it, and you execute the drill 5 times, you're good and you've passed. At the infantry Marine course, we've adjusted the student to instructor ratio, and we've put the students, given them additional leadership billets, and put them into situations where they fail, controlled failure in a training environment. So instead of immediately looking to the combat instructor for the right answer, they figure it out on their own. So using controlled failure as a learning tool is a very effective way of doing that. And that may, in this case that you just talked about, Frank, that may, in a controlled environment, taking that leader that's, playing the action figure or adopted a persona, throwing a leadership challenge at that individual in a controlled environment where a little bit of failure can reveal that, hey, you see how this doesn't quite work every time just the way you think it is? Here's another way of approaching this situation. That's going to mean more to the individual than just, I've repeated what you said, here's the right answer, and off we go. Hopefully that makes a little sense.
It does. No, I thought that was very well said. Thank you.
Kind of continuing on with some of this, the leadership and relationship type stuff. What are some of the characteristics of the best officer, staff, and NCO working relationships you've had during your time in the Marine Corps?
So I got to tell you, first and foremost, again, I've learned more from the staff NCOs than the officers I've worked with. I truly admire the staff NCOs because of all the roles they play simultaneously. Okay, they're a teacher, they're a coach, they're a mentor, both up and down the chain of command, all at the same time. So they're, of course, the staff NCOs are responsible for, training, coaching, mentoring the NCOs, but they're also doing that for the officers. And that's a tough position to be in, to train in both directions at the same time. They're molding and shaping the junior officers that they're assigned with. So first off, that's a tough position for them to be in. But the characteristics, I mean, absolutely, first and foremost, have to be a duty expert in whatever MOS they're in. They by this time, they should have mastered the key aspects of their MOS. They've got to have a finger on the pulse of the unit, not just the apparent, data and statistics, and TNR completion, things like that, but really have a finger on the pulse of everybody on the unit to advise some of those junior officers. They've got to absolutely be relied upon to get it done. I mean, at that point, as a staff NCO, we're minimizing the amount of direction that's given and saying, here's the mission, here's the intent, execute. And just like, when you mentioned being that liaison at 51.5, that trust and confidence has to be there quickly. Hey, we don't have time to sit here and sketch this thing out. I need you to execute. We demand that of our staff NCOs. And then the relationships. Okay, so that's effective inside the unit. But to really get to that point where we can just say, hey, execute, the staff NCO Corps absolutely needs to have those relationships built with higher adjacent units, partner units. I mean, we talk about the staff NCO mafia. It absolutely exists. And as officers, we rely on that, hey, you've got to have some friends over in the MLG who can help us, prepare for this readiness inspection, who can help us get maintenance up and where it needs to be. There's this very formal chain of command, and the staff NCOs are running the informal chain of command in the right ways. Having those relationships with other units, being able to call their peers in other units, going, "Hey, how did you get through this inspection? Hey, how did you get through PTP this way? Hey, we got bumped off of this range. I need to call my friend at range control who can help get us, scheduled in or get us in the helo dunker at the pool." I mean, so we rely on that. The informal chain of command really starts at the staff NCO level, and then again, as an officer, having staff NCOs who, like you and I, can be that honest broker you can say, "Hey, yeah, I saw what was in the after action report. Here's everything that wasn't written in the after action report," and have that professional relationship. I've always found, grounding within the staff NCO corps, that there are staff NCOs I could rely on that could go, "Yeah, that's what the, as a battalion commander, that's what the company commanders are telling you. But, sir, you may want to take a look, over at this platoon. Their readiness numbers aren't exactly the way they're being portrayed." And it's not being a tattletale, it's being an honest broker. Or like you and I, "Hey, I got an idea. I think we ought to try this." And having the staff NCO just look at you in the eye and go, "Yeah, that sounds good in your officer head, but here's what your enlisted Marines are going to hear if you say that out in public." Mm-hmm. So again, those are 5, I think, critical characteristics of the officer staff NCO relationship. And it doesn't happen on day one. It's going to happen through reps and sets. It's going to happen through some uncomfortable conversations. It's going to happen off duty. It's going to happen like, "Hey, let's have a beer. Let's just talk about this thing. I mean, I can't figure it out. All right. I want to hear your insights into this problem. And together we'll come up with a solution. And you know what? It's better for all."
No, that's a good, thorough answer. And I completely agree with that. It is a relationship based organization. Whenever weapons training battalion pissed off range control, I often got a phone call saying, "Hey, can you have a good relationship with Dank? Can you go over there and smooth some things over?" And it's just like, yeah, no problem. And me and Dank have that professional relationship. Anytime Dank came out to the range, like, people would be like, "Hey, Dank's coming out. Okay, I'll be right out there." And Dank's like, "You don't have to babysit me out here." I was like, "Dude, I'm just coming out to hang out with you. I haven't seen you in forever." He's like, "No, I know what the fuck you're doing." I was like, "It's all good, man." I was like, "Do you see any problems out here?" "Nah." "Okay, let's bullshit now." And we would just kind of hang out, and like, but if there was ever any friction, it's just like, it's those relationships that smooth things over. Like, professional relationships and that good old boy club does make a difference. And some people get it right, some people don't. They have to learn it on their own.
And it can be abused too. I mean, we've seen that. So
Yes.
again, that's when the staff NCO network becomes the staff NCO mafia.
Mm-hmm.
And again, any system can, experience entropy and get out of control. But when used properly, it's absolutely essential. And that's what we had. And that exists in every unit and every different element of the MAGTF across the Marine Corps and the supporting establishment. But it's key for staff NCOs because they've been around long enough. They've had enough, A billets and B billets and deployments, and been on the drill field or out on recruiting or in the supporting establishment elsewhere, that they have the network and they can help, especially the junior officers, and in this case, the senior officers, get to the answer faster and more effectively, because they've gotten reps and sets in areas that the officers just haven't had. So again, that's that absolute partnership. And you ask, what are the characteristics of a good officer staff NCO relationship? Those are 5 things that just riffed off the top. There's probably so many more, but for this conversation, that's what I believe.
So we all understand that, like, there are certain deployments, certain moments in our careers that really have developed us into who we are. So what particular duty stations, deployments, or relationships do you consider pivotal to who you are today?
They say, as the twig is bent, so grows the tree. I mean, a lot of officers and enlisted Marines, their first duty station is the one that really kind of sets them on the path they're going to take for the rest of their career, whether it's 4 years, 14 years, 30 years, whatever. So I go back to that first one. The staff NCOs at 3rd AA Battalion, Gunny Phil Coble, look at me now, 2 ears, 1 mouth, listen twice as much as you talk. But when we were on the MEU, this really impacted me because, as a young officer, a second lieutenant on the MEU, I was, stuck in a lot of cases between, the MEU commander, the BLT commander, the Met Company commander, all demanding A, B, and C for the AAV platoon. And my platoon looking at me going, that's insane. There's no way we can do that. That's beyond, who do you trust at that point? Of course, as a second lieutenant, you're looking at a captain, a lieutenant colonel, and a colonel saying, do exactly this. And the Marines that you're with all day, every day going, it's impossible. So how do you reconcile that challenge? That all came to a head on the Harper's Ferry off the coast of Australia. There was a cyclone that had just gone through. Major, combined exercise with the Australians. The sea state was too high to launch AAVs. The MEU, the BLT, and the Met Company were saying, hey, you don't have any stones at all if you don't go launch. This is the last day of the exercise. You absolutely have to launch today. I turned to the Gunny and said, Gunny, can we make it? And he said, well, yeah, but not all of us. He said, sea state's too high. We just gotta cancel this. So that's a tough spot for a very young officer to be in, trying to balance, again, senior officers demanding something and you're the people that you're with and trust giving you, sound advice saying, this is a really bad idea. And that was, again, the first time that we were challenged, lowered the well deck. The waves came into the well deck and lifted up the first row of AAVs, pushed them into the second row of AAVs. Second lieutenant canceled the major operation. And there was hell to pay with the Met Company, the BLT, and the MEU. But my staff NCOs, stood there and said, if you go down, we're going down with you. We made the right call. So that was pivotal. And that really solidified that relationship with the staff NCOs, the platoon sergeant and the 3 section leaders, the 3 staff sergeants. That really solidified, where I stand in taking sound advice and separating the wheat from the chaff. And at the end of the day, it was General Fulford, the senior, who was, I guess, Mar4 Pack Commander, flew out to the ship. The officers were all convinced I was getting formally relieved that day, and we got rewarded. Only because General Fulford stepped on the deck and said there was no reason anybody had to get hurt today. That was a good call. So again, that was the first of quite a few instances where that shaped the way I think and my leadership style. That you've got to take in the input, whether you agree with it or not. You got to hear the input of those who have been doing this longer. Again, second lieutenant, I was maybe 18 months in the Marine Corps. The Gunny at that point, 12 to 14 years of doing Amtrackery. And if he's saying this is a bad idea and given a really good rationale, it's probably a really bad idea. And that was worth, if I'm going to be wrong, I'm going to be wrong in the right way. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that stuck with me. And it happened quite a few other times. 8th and I, Colonel Kevin Brickhouse was a CO at the time. I was a company commander, and we're feeling pretty good about ourselves. Company commanders at 8th and I, oldest post in the Corps, representing the Marine Corps to thousands of people every week. We're feeling pretty big about ourselves. And Colonel Brickhouse sat all the company commanders down one day, and he said, pull out a piece of paper. So we did. And he said, okay. And I thought, well, we're going to get a test. Marine Corps skills manual, drill and ceremony, something like that. He said, tell me exactly in dollars and cents, how much does a Lance Corporal make every paycheck? Okay. How many washers and dryers are broken on the 3rd deck of the barracks? So there's 3 company commanders with blank sheets of paper, and without making a big production of it, Colonel Brickhouse looked us in the eye and said, "It's because you don't know your Marines. Anybody can jump up and down and bark out orders and read off of a checklist, and you got to know your Marines to lead them. We're going to do this again, at a time of my choosing. And if I see blank sheets of paper, I'm going to have new company commanders. So again, that was probably the second point that really shaped my leadership outlook and helped me focus on counseling and that leadership is not one size fits all. You absolutely have to know your Marines and you have to know what's important to them. It's very difficult and it takes time, but it's absolutely worth it to really get through, know who needs to be pushed, who needs to be pulled, who needs a pat on the back, who needs a kick in the ass, and know what's important to the unit. And that's, that sense of why. So, I mean, those are just two. I could go on. But I think the last and the one that affects both of us was, ARQ at Weapons Training Battalion. I mean, Gunner Vigiani and I were not the authors of ARQ. Pete Farnham and all the leaders who preceded us had tried to get to ARQ, but we took a different approach. And that's when I realized that, three very important letters are the key to understanding, and that's why. Okay. I think what kind of lacked in the past, and the reason that the failures of those who preceded us was, not describing why we were changing the annual qualification. Vigiani and I had something our predecessors didn't have, and that was the capability or lethality capabilities based assessment. And that was an objective study that said that even though, 80 something percent of the Marine Corps had fired expert on the rifle range, in combat, there was only a 30% probability of achieving a vital hit, a lethal hit, if the Marine was moving, target was moving, multiple targets or targets at unknown distance. So armed with that, Vigiani and I sat down with not just the marksmanship community, but the customer base, the FMF and the supporting establishment, and said, here's why we need to take a different approach. Here's why bullseye shooting is good, foundationally, but bullseye shooting and basic marksmanship does not translate into lethal effect in combat. So we started with why. And from that foundation, we took it to the customer. And we followed the Marine Corps shooting team all over the globe. And we took that opportunity to engage with the regiments, with the divisions, with the MLG, with the wing. And we said, here, look at this. Here's a data set, 80% expert, 30% probability of achieving a vital hit. We need to take a different approach to training. And then we listened. So it wasn't just, hey, we're from headquarters Marine Corps and we're here to change the way we do business. We said, okay, problem, solution. Let's hear what you have. And we took all of their concerns in, we recorded their concerns, and we shaped ARQ around a shared understanding based on why. And then again, that the rest is pretty much history. And then we did something different. Is we set the thresholds for sharpshooter, marksman, and expert based on what could be achieved. Meaning, we didn't just make up, okay, this is the threshold for expert, this is the threshold for sharpshooter, and this is the threshold for marksman. We did a test with 600 Marines from across the FMF and the supporting establishment. We took those 600 scores and said, okay, the top 15% are expert, and so on. So again, it was collaborative, but it was based on why. Again, this is generational. I mean, I'm old. Well, you're kind of old too. Look at the gray in your beard. But anyway, again, generationally, we grew up with, because I effing said so.
Mm-hmm.
And that was good enough. You know what I mean? Because there's because the MCDP says do it this way. I said do it this way. Okay. Generationally, this generation of Marines has instantaneous access to information. And they've lived in a digital world. They're digital natives. We're not. So why is an important thing. So I took up too much time, but those are three inflection points in my journey as a leader. Learning to trust the staff NCOs, taking a stand for what's right. You can only be a leader if you know the people you're leading. And then, for a big major exercise or a big major change in doctrine or procedure, the people that you're implementing this on need to understand why.
So you kind of said something there that really sticks out to me, especially whenever it comes to the why, because the why is the intent on why you're doing something.
Yeah.
And I remember one of my last bosses I had, and you know who he is. Frank knows who he is. It was a very dark and negative spot in my career, one of the more trying parts of my career. But one thing I remember is we were sitting in his office and he was giving us some type of direction. And so I just asked, I was like, "Sir, why are we doing it like this?" And he was like, "Sometimes you're not always going to get the why. Think about whenever you're in combat, you're not going to be given the why. You just got to do it." I was like, "Sir, you don't understand. The why is the intent. How can I operate off of your intent if I don't know why you're doing something?" And what I've learned is the people who don't want to give the why, one, either don't know, or two, it's not that they don't know, it's that they have something to hide and they want to try and get something over on everybody else. And they are being completely selfish in their decision making abilities. And so, you're absolutely right in, like, whenever I first came in the Marine Corps, it was like, don't ask me why we're doing it, just fucking do it. And there was no ill will in that. That's just generationally how it was back then.
Yeah.
But we have gotten smarter as a Marine Corps. Like, Marines nowadays are so much smarter due to the information flow that's out there compared to what we had whenever we were in. And it's a great thing. It's like, hey, I want you to ask me the why, because if you ask me the why, you're asking me the right questions, and you yourself will understand what it is I want you to achieve. You can accomplish the mission. You can have the flexibility to make your own decisions and figure out a solution on your own. And that's how you truly develop Marines throughout their careers. Give them the intent and let them run.
That's it. And again, so for Frank, I mean that's to me part of being genuine. Again, so the question was, I mean, what were the moments or the inflection points or something like that for me? I mean, when I realized that, if I'm my genuine self as a leader, I can tap into your genuine self, and we can have a shared understanding of the why, and you can operate, just on intent alone, and there's trust. You trust in what I'm telling you, or I'm ordering or directing you to do, and I have trust that you understand and can execute, no matter how complicated, whatever barriers are thrown in there. So again, to me, that's part of being a genuine leader. And like you said, Matt, I mean, those who are like, no, because I effing said so, they're either hiding, uncertainty, they're hiding the fact that they don't really even understand the mission or the complexity of the mission, or they're trying to hide the fact that the direction they're giving is based on self-serving nature.
Mm-hmm. So, with all that being said, what would you consider the most difficult or trying point of your career, and how did you overcome it? How did that change you as a Marine, a leader, and a person? And what advice would you give to someone going through something very similar?
Well, I won't go all the way back into it. I mentioned, I think the first time I was truly tested was, off the coast of Australia, and I think the lesson learned there, it's about what's right and not who's right, and that's what really stuck with me, is that minor things can be negotiated, right? But if you're given an order or a direction that is a clear violation of the law, is morally wrong, or has an unseen potential for hurting or killing a Marine unnecessarily, that's worth taking a stand for, and that's worth fighting for as a leader. And I mean, those things happen, rarely, but when they do, focus on what's right instead of who's right. And for me in that instance on the 11th MEU, I was willing to be wrong for the right reasons and then face whatever consequences. So again, that is the most difficult and trying point in my career, at a young age. And then luckily I learned that early on, and that when those things happened again in OIF and happened again at, whether it was at the White House, as a congressional liaison in TCOM, I mean, it happened again most recently with, having conducted the SIB, Safety Investigation Board, on the 6th ACV mishap. One of the conclusions was the vehicle has some idiosyncrasies, but what's really the root cause of these mishaps was a lack of effective training. And having to brief the assistant commandant and look him in the eye and say, listen, my conclusion is that we didn't train these Marines the right way. We there are so many instances of negative habit transference, and that we just took a lot of our manuals and we crossed off AAV and wrote in ACV, and took the short route. More so, we have to go back and retrain and recertify them. I mean, that's a difficult conversation. And again, that's about what's right, not who's right. And there was tremendous institutional pressure to just keep blaming the vehicle, just keep blaming the vehicle. Now, I mean, the evidence clearly showed it was, lack of effective training. And, you look the assistant commandant in the eye, and who's now the commandant, but anyway, and say, listen, we messed up. And that's the, primarily the responsibility of TCOM. So I was chief of staff of TCOM at the time, and I've got my boss sitting next to me, and I'm briefing his boss that we institutionally made a misstep. And the only way to correct it is to stop everything. We stopped everything for about 6 months and retrain and recertify everybody. I mean, but that was easier. That was an easier decision based on what I had learned all the way back as a second lieutenant on the MEU. It's about what's right, not who's right. And if you're going to be wrong for the right reasons, and accept, whatever consequences, because I'd rather have been booted out of the Marine Corps with my integrity intact than to have been slave to the status quo just to ensure longevity. I know it's easy to say that in hindsight. It was not that easy at the time, but I mean, we were all going to face those challenges personally, professionally. Take stock in what's right.
You got more grays at TCOM than anywhere else. I mean, you already had some grays in your hair before then, but I would say TCOM definitely put a lot of that stress on you because you were in control of so many programs there. And you were I don't want to say you were overtasked, overburdened, but you were responsible for a lot of things, and that there's stress in that, and you had to get it right. And I would say you got a lot right.
We got a few things wrong, but it's learning. But I mean, that's what makes the job fun. I mean, if it was easy, more people would do it, right? I mean, that's part of being a Marine. Loved it. I miss it like you wouldn't believe right now.
On that note, you say you miss it, but you retired about a month ago. You still have some time on terminal left. How are you viewing, the 30 years of what you've accomplished and everything that you've experienced in the Marine Corps? And then how is that informing your switch into the private sector?
It comes down to, conversations like this, and then just reminding myself, what had worked in the Marine Corps, what I would have done different. I have it, all of us who are transitioning, whether it's, a couple of years or 30 years, we've got to capitalize on that. Again, I mean, that just makes us effective leaders in any realm, whether it's the military realm or the civilian realm. But, if I could plan my transition a little differently, I would have taken better care of myself. I've had a little bit of, behavioral health counseling and things like that. And we have a tendency to wear burnout as a badge. Mm-hmm. And we ride the hardest workers even harder. And I'm not saying this is woe is me, but I mean, a lesson I've learned is if I could go back a couple of years, I would have, practiced a little more of what I preached in terms of balance with my family, with my, physical health, psychological health, things like that. And, like Matt, we talked about how Matt is so good at connecting. I would have, put more value in those relationships than, I'm going to get this done. I don't care if it takes till 22 or 2300 tonight. But there's a certain alpha type personality that most Marines have, and it's called wearing burnout as a badge. And I think that's making my personal transition a little more difficult. So if I could, again, lend something to somebody else is, achieve those balances, maintain those relationships. I'm lucky enough that, guys like Matt and some of my other friends and family have tolerated my, burnout as a badge lifestyle, but, not everybody's that lucky. So, having a better balance, in your personal and your professional life, especially toward the end, if I could do it different, that's how I would do it differently. Because, at the end of the day, no one remembers that you stayed in the office till 22 or 2300, for years straight. They just remember what kind of person you are, how, what type of relationship you have with them, and what you taught them. So hopefully that's a satisfactory answer.
It was. It's something I say to Marines, especially the ones that like to be at work and like to put everything they have into the job. And that's kind of what makes the Marine Corps is because we have people like that. Uh, but in my counseling sessions, a lot of times I have to tell them like, you know, eventually you're gonna take off the uniform, but your family's still gonna be there. Hopefully, I would like your family to still be there. But I guess we'll jump ahead a little bit. You talk about taking more time for yourself, and that's difficult, right? As you become a senior officer and you have more responsibility, balancing the professional life and the family life. Um, are you now like turning your attention to some more, I guess, hobbies, like physical, intellectual hobbies? We talked to Colonel Jones, and one of the things that he was like, man, I get to read now. I get to actually
Yeah.
like, not just professional development. I get to go back. He's never read 1984 before. Are you finding as you turn this new page in the book of your life, are you finding time for some of those other hobbies that you really didn't have time for before?
Well, yeah, one of them is photography. Again, I joke about it. I do enjoy it, but I joke with my daughter's boyfriend, and she's 14 anyway. That he asked me, how'd you get into photography? I said, well, a telephoto lens on a camera body is remarkably similar to a scope on a precision rifle. And the fact that for sports photography, which is what I do, the perfect shot, catching the pass in the end zone or something like that, those perfect shots only exist for a fraction of a second. And so you've either got to have a sustained lead on the target or set the ambush area with the camera and the lens, and it's about light and aperture, things like that. So I mean, I've done that, but honestly, I'm only a month in to my transition, and I'm trying to repair some of the relationships I've abused. That's a bad word to use, but I mean the relationships I've pushed aside in pursuit of personal goals. And what was really poignant to me, and Matt was at the retirement, uh, very rarely in your life are people representatives from every phase of your life in the same room at the same time. And I mean, that was a humbling and very deeply felt experience for me, at the Warner Auditorium there at Marine Corps University, seeing representatives from every phase of my life right there at the same time, to help celebrate. And that reminded me that, I've kept those relationships, but not well enough. And, these last 30 days, I've been really doing what Matt does so well, just making random phone calls to people like, hey, I know we said we were going to get together for, this, that, or the other thing. And yeah, I've work has always taken priority. Hey, I want to have lunch with you. Let's go have a coffee. And so rebuilding those personal relationships, finding something entirely different. I mean, nobody gets better sitting inside of their comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the thing. So, I mean, I read somewhere, and again, I'm reading just like Greg Jones is, you scare yourself every so often. I mean, get outside your comfort zone, try something entirely new, exciting, or different. Um, because one of two things will happen. You'll either confirm something you already know and solidify it, or you'll learn something entirely new or different. And that's, for me, photography is that kind of artistic outlet. It's about the only thing I can do. But it's scary because someone will judge it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Someone will look at it and go, hey,
Right.
that's pretty awesome. Or hey, the hell were you thinking? And it's weird and it's raw and it's uncomfortable. But I mean, that's a thing I've never had time to do on active duty. And I've gotten into it in the last year, and it's I'm growing a little bit. So at 53 years old, I'm growing a little bit. So,
And yeah, I
but I
mean,
mean, those are important things.
yeah, it's a lifelong thing. I mean, it's an art, putting photographs out there, and there's a vulnerability to it, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, Matt started this podcast on his own, eventually brought me on, but I think, the product that we both put out there, we get judged for that too. And, there's lots of listeners out there, and I think sometimes we may miss the mark, but I think it's important, right? This isn't something I would have done on my own. I'm glad that Matt brought me along to record with him. But yeah, that's not something we really get exposed to as often as, senior leadership in the Marine Corps, that kind of vulnerability. This next question is something I asked Matt after his retirement. I call it the sweet or sour question. So can you go into one instance in your career where being diplomatic achieved the best results, and then another where being aggressive perhaps yielded the best effect? And then do you consider being able to be both, balancing both approaches to be an important facet of leadership in the Marine Corps?
That's a great question. In my opinion, the leadership toolbox has got to have both. I mean, there's a time for diplomacy. There's a time for brute force, getting it done. And I think one of the aspects in the art of leadership is knowing when, where, and to what degree to employ each of those vastly different tools. I think, the one example of diplomatic, and Matt knows this one very well, is when a very senior, when I say very senior, I mean very senior Marine Corps officer looked me in the eye and said, the Marine Corps shooting team is nothing more than an expensive luxury. I want to get rid of it. It is no value to the Marine Corps. And the diplomatic approach was to, quietly and kind of diffuse that situation. I couldn't look this general in the eye and say, no, you're absolutely wrong. I mean, I had to, play the diplomacy game and, well, sir, give me an opportunity and we'll develop some discrete metrics from which to measure, utility and value. And we had bought us a year to really, show some results, which we did. And it set the seeds for where the team is going now, because the bullseye shooting in Camp Perry is fun and nice, but it really was very little value to the Marine Corps. But we turned that around. That was the diplomatic approach.
It is not fun and nice. I'm just going to
say, okay, for some people, it's fun and nice. So that was the diplomatic
That's
approach.
the aggressive side
kind of
coming out of me.
I mean, that was diplomatic to diffuse, the fact that, the funding was about to be pulled for the team, and having to demonstrate that that individual's observations weren't entirely accurate, but we had to produce results, which we did. And then, again, the brute force approach was, slash and burn, scorched earth was, again, retraining, telling the assistant commandant that our training sucks when it comes to, the ACV, and we have to go retrain everybody. So again, those are two diametric opposites, but there's a little bit of each involved in both of them. So, it's not purely, binary, one or the other. But I think, the reps and sets, we talk about, how long does it take to make a gunnery sergeant? How long does it take to make a master sergeant or a master guns? It's the entire career. And that entire career is made up of every positive and negative experience they've ever had. Mm-hmm. And they pull that to bear at those moments when they're tested. And then they say, okay, which is the best option, diplomacy or brute force strength? And, or the combination thereof.
Yeah, very well said. Wrapping up, but we got to bring it back to marksmanship. That's what the podcast is about. And that was a huge part of your life as the CO weapons training battalion, also as a Marine. But what do you think the future of Marine Corps marksmanship holds? I'm sure you've stayed abreast of all the developments over at Weapons Training Battalion Quantico. And what do you think needs to happen organizationally and culturally to continue to get us to progress as a service?
So, yeah, another great question. So I think we're definitely on the right track. And I mentioned that, Vigiani and I, and even Matt, were not the authors of this change, but the reorientation on lethality. I think that was the biggest and most necessary change that we started and began to implement, going from, annual rifle training, the bullseye style shooting that really was left unchanged since 1907. Mm-hmm. The focus on lethality. That was an absolutely valuable change, and it was necessary because, again, time is our enemy. We don't have the time we used to. So, going through this long, drawn-out, graduated, step by step by step, what gets us into the zone faster is, again, a focus on lethality, and that was enabled by outcomes-based training and education. I mentioned it before. Inputs-based is what we used to do. here are your ELOs and your TLOs. I will teach you this weapon and you will shoot this course of fire, and what you get is what you get, and off you go. And if you're good, you're good. And if you're not good, good luck getting better. But outcomes-based training and education is really what ARQ was founded on. And that is being enabled by JMAP, and that's JMAP, AMTP, the IAP, the assessment part. Assessment is a lot of what we were missing in getting us toward that focus on lethality. It was always just a raw score, marksman, sharpshooter, expert, and that's it. And then if you did anything over and above that, good luck. But without being able to measure and assess, we're not going to get to where we need to be. And those tools that have been introduced and are being reinforced, Greg Jones and his team, phenomenal steps forward. So we're going in the right direction. And technology is a part of this. Now not technology to make up for a lack of technique or technology to make up for a lack of accuracy. Technology that enables those primary marksmanship instructors and those combat instructors to really break down the elements of the technique into their fundamental pieces and be able to isolate that. The perfect example is what Sig Sauer calls TCS, Task Conditions and Standards. And that's a lot of what our current marksmanship is based off of. So again, if the drill, and I'll just use this quick example, if the drill is, with a pistol at 5 yards, draw and fire, 2 shots, slide lock, reload, 2 more shots. If the standard's 5 1/4 seconds with all shots fitting inside of an 8-inch circle, lethal zone inside the upper thoracic cavity, inputs-based training is, okay, did you make it or didn't you? And if you didn't make it, what's your natural tendency? Your natural tendency is just to throw down the accelerator. Okay, but through SIG's TCSs, task conditions and standards, it breaks that drill into its subordinate parts. So, from the buzzer, draw and fire, the first shot has to happen within 2 seconds. An ideal split is 0.35 seconds. An ideal magazine change is 2.5 seconds. And then the split is another 0.35 seconds. So again, understanding those building block elements. And I put Vigiani through this, and hopefully he's not listening, or he'll be like, "Oh, you son of a bitch, you're telling the story." But anyway, I had to make a believer of him, and we did the drill. He did not achieve the standard in 5 1/4 seconds. I told him, "You didn't make it." He threw down the accelerator. His shots went wider. He got worse. But then when I broke it down and said, "Hey, your draw is fine, your splits are fine, your reload is happening in over 3 seconds. That's where you're losing it. Let's focus on doing some reload drills." We got his reloads under 2.5 seconds. Now all of a sudden he's making the standard. Again, that is outcomes-based training and education, which is a lot of what we have incorporated out there at Weapons Training Battalion, and only enabled by JMAP and AMTP and some of the technology practice score. We have found that sweet spot between speed and accuracy. That's a lot of what was missing in a lot of our previous training. You either hit the target or you didn't. If you didn't hit it, well, try harder, son. Okay, now that we can break it down into its little pieces, and we have technology that enables us to be more effective coaches, because how hard is it, to become an effective coach? You just need reps and sets on that firing line. And, as an instructor, you need to be able to see through the back of the shooter's head and communicate to the shooter in their language what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, where they need to improve. That takes years to build that type of proficiency as an instructor. But through these technological tools, again, the practice score, speed and accuracy, JMAP, breaking things into their subordinate elements, that's helping our instructor cadre leverage technology to be better and more effective instructors and bring about positive results in the most efficient time possible. I say efficient because everybody wants it faster, sooner, faster. But when you go faster, and you cut training time and you cut ammo, you lose quality. Mm-hmm. This is the only way, not the only way, this is one of the only ways that we can achieve some sort of parity and balance and make instructors more effective faster, which makes our shooters more lethal. End of sermon. Sorry.
Yeah, that, for a second there, you sound like a competitive shooter, just breaking down the par times and the reload and everything. And Yeah,
What greater competition is there than combat?
it's true.
You know what I mean? It's not alphas, Charlies, deltas, and your hit score.
Right.
It's, did I take down the enemy faster than he can take me down?
Right.
And it's essential under duress, because we don't resort to the last thing we were trained. We resort to the last thing that has been made permanent.
Mm-hmm.
And with these tools, we can establish permanence through sustained training, understanding the building blocks. So what is the state of Marine Corps marksmanship? We're going the right direction. We're not there yet. There's still a lot of holdouts out there. There's still, history. We believe in history and legacy. And yes, absolutely. History and legacy has taught us so many valuable things. But, history and legacy should inform, but not constrain. So there's a lot of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, the lethality capability-based assessment said it's broken. And so, there's some, I'm an old timer, but there's some graybeards who are like, nope, that's how we've always done it. And we're going to keep doing it that way. Well, you know what? The good news is they're aging out and they're being replaced by those who understand, again, the fundamental building blocks of proficiency, speed and accuracy leading to lethality. Lethal effect is the goal, not did we beat the Army out at Camp Perry?
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Sacrilege. But again, the general was right. When we were just focused on going out to Camp Perry and are we going to beat the Army, which we very rarely ever did, we were an expensive luxury. But once the team adopted SIG TCS, we brought SIG down and they made us master instructors. Mm-hmm. Because again, the shooting team, I equate the Marine Corps shooting team to NASCAR. Okay, NASCAR is more than just 200-mile-an-hour left-hand turns. Okay, what is learned on the track in NASCAR often finds its way into the car lots. When it comes to suspension, when it comes to safety devices, when it comes to automotive technology, what succeeds out on the NASCAR track often finds its way into the car lots, and we're all better for it. So for the shooting team, they push the machine and the human being to the absolute limit, and what's learned has to find its way back to the Marine Corps. So having a cadre of high-speed shooters is fun, but it wasn't really value added to the Marine Corps. But once we said, you're not just competitors, you're pushing the machine and you're pushing the human being to the limit. And what you learn has to come back to Weapons Training Battalion, get written into doctrine, and then make the rest of the Marine Corps better from what is learned, again, from the ultimate competition, life or death in combat.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they're out there doing. They are pushing the boundaries of what is possible with the service rifle and the service pistol. And they're doing amazing things with them. But yeah, ultimately those lessons are coming back to the fleet. So, I mean, it's been really neat for me, all the guests that we've had on over the years, just really charting the trajectory. Because one of the episodes that Matt and I did was Major Jared Dalton, who's currently at the Naval Academy. I'm about to be teaching with him. And he was the first OIC of the combat shooting team. And just watching, the change from the legacy disciplines into the action shooting and how it's translating into things like ARQ, potentially a new pistol qual, is really great. But I thought that was all incredibly well said. At this time, that's all the questions we had for you. Is there anything else you want to leave the audience with?
This has been a lot of fun. And again, these conversations are the ones that have to happen. I appreciate that you've got a platform and listeners, because otherwise a lot of these conversations are happening all across the Marine Corps in an all hands club, out at the downrange club, after a competition, after a field event. But unless they're getting spread out to as many people as possible, those echoes evaporate and those lessons learned leave with people like me and Matt. So, I really appreciate this opportunity. And, again, it's a lot of fun, and, we're just adding to that new legacy. So thank you.
Absolutely. And it was our pleasure having you on. If you hope you all enjoyed this conversation with Colonel Hall, let us know how we're doing, and we'll see you on the next one.